Okay, good people. Hello and welcome to Making Worlds Cooperative Bookstore and Social Center. Very warm and happy Friday to you all. Thank you so much for coming out. Not just to this bookstore to get your fix on inspiring and change-making literature and other things, but also to help us launch Alex Smith's ARKDust into the universe. That's a very special occasion. And so, yes, we are very honored to be able to host and to be a space that can gather us today in community and to learn from and to think with and to move through Alex's mind and writing practice and to learn more about some of the deeper political and cultural and aesthetic projects that Alex and others in all of these different kind of conspiracies have collectively done in West Philadelphia and Philadelphia, and inventing and renewing like literary traditions that are important for us to pay attention to, and to be able to thrive in a kind of very corporate and very individualistic kind of media landscape. To be able to put together community and ideas is no small thing. So we are here to honor all that and celebrate that, and so we're gonna be able to do all that through an interview and a conversation with members of Metropolarity, Roz and Monk, who will be you all already know, who will be taking us through that journey with Alex. So how about I'll leave it to you all to introduce a little bit more about Metropolarity, although judging from the finger snaps, everybody already knows. So all to say, welcome again. Thank you so much for coming out. And yeah, give it up for Alex Smith.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a little teeny tiny reading from this book. It's called ARKDust, and I'll just give you a really just blast through the secret origin story of this book. And so basically in 2010, I took a writing class with Mia Wright. My partner Shane and I went to this writing class, and Mia does Black Girl Dangerous. They used to live here in Philadelphia, and they invited me to an event called Scary Queer at the A Space. And in that event, she was gathering like queer writers to read horror stories at the A Space for Halloween. And in my brain, I was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm going to get up there and like read a story? That doesn't make sense. Like, it felt very foreign and very weird. And like back in 2011 or whatever. And, I'm coming from the poetry scene and the open mic and the slam scene and stuff like that. So getting up there and reading like a story with all of its nuances and weirdness felt foreign, but I busted it out. And that story is actually in here, actually. It's the oldest story in this book. So that gave me the idea to do an event called Laser Life, which was a queer sci-fi reading. And the first person to contact me, well, actually, you were the second person, maybe, second or third, but those other people were terrible, and so I did not let them read. No, I'm just spilling the tea because it's like, because the reason why is because, like, what we were trying to do was just basically find a space, a church, if you will, some kind of sanctuary, some kind of ashram where we can just gather and read these weird sci-fi, surreal, and future-forwarding stories to each other. And that is how I started on this journey of like writing science fiction and getting serious about it and like honing my craft and stuff like that. And then after meeting Monk, then I met Ross, and then I met Rashida Phillips, and then I kept just meeting more and more people, and it sort of expanded, and we got too big for the A Space, and then we formed a group called Metropolarity at Ross's call. And Metropolarity is basically a sci-fi artist, activist collective. We do lectures, workshops, readings. with the sole idea of putting black people forward and into the future. And we've branched out and done other things, like Rashida was already doing Afrofuturist Affair. Now she's doing Black Quantum Futurism. Roz has Deep Space Mind. And Monk has Cyborg Memoirs. So yeah, we're going to talk all about that stuff. But right now, that's the secret origin. Well, one more little passage in the secret origin. So I made a zine. It was called ARKDust. The reason why I made a zine was because I wanted stuff to sell at the shows that we were doing. And I did 2 issues of the zine, so that means I officially had a zine. You have to do 2 issues or you don't have a zine. I'm sorry, that's just my rule, and I'm going to stick to it, and it's the law. So I did 2 issues, so that means I officially had a zine, and I had guest writers too. Shane was a guest writer, Monk was a guest writer, so I had me a little zine. A lot of those stories evolved and jumped into here. I had a blog called The Afterverse, where I got the name from my self-publishing company. And then eventually I self-published this, and I gave it to my friend Bill Campbell. He's a friend. I gave it to him to read. He was halfway through it, and he called me and said, I got to publish this. So here it is. And I got some blurbs here. Yeah, thank you. Robert Jones, a.k.a. the son of Baldwin from Facebook, Samuel J. Miller, and of course Samuel Delany wrote really kind words. This is, to bring it all home, this is the story that made Samuel Delany go wide-eyed, and I will never forget that day, because we read together and it was so sweet and cool, and he loved what I was reading, so I can die happy. All right. The Final Flight of the Unicorn Girl. We grinned at sin mostly. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But, yeah. We grinned at sin mostly. Spiraling through black ether as a bright yellow wave, crash landing on the roof or splashing into windows on wires, reeling off one-liners and brash talk that belied the danger of the situation. Excuse me. Thanks. A flunky with bad breath and an ill-fitting suit would pull some kind of lever, and these hired goons, probably deadbeat fathers with no pension or former mercenaries bored and ill-adapted to civilian life, meatheads spawned from some cult or hate group they'd been kicked out of, they'd all come trotting out, decorated with surplus pouches and clunky artillery hanging from their taut strings of their utility belts. We waded across floors riddled with spent shell casings and turned those goons' guns into splinters. We jacked up men in suits, crashed through the skylight in the boardrooms of these shadow corporations. We hemmed mobsters, fat with the toxic nuclear steroid of the month to cement walls. Guidos jacked up on superpowered drugs and contaminants. They all flinched and fired aimlessly at our swift, gliding rainbow of dizzy confusion. We bounced on drug dealers' tables and kicked over artifacts illegally procured from alien worlds and alternate universes. We burned those buildings to the ground. A gleeful flick of a finger on a kerosene-soaked hallway swept away in the backdraft, watching the flames lick at our winged footies as we blasted back into the night sky. We stood there defiantly in the streets as we raised villain enclaves or looked through high-tech binoculars from a few miles away as one after the other, these towers of oppression fell from the lines in the sky, crumbling into a pit of ash and mold, just fragments of ideas left, just the rocks. We smiled wildly at the sight, some of us running up light posts and baying at the moon or waving flags bigger than our young bodies, bright crimson drapes of cloth swaying gently in the night breeze emblazoned with our crests. Or some of us would let loose, wearing jetpacks and bursting out of fireworks and letting the lights entangle us in red stars, in green lightning bolts and violet hearts. So don't just let us die out here. The rain is almost toxic. Feels like acid is going to eat through my overcoat. I look at this boy in my arms. He's wearing a silver spandex suit. He's also wearing about 7 bullets lodged in places that don't seem to make sense. He's such a life thing, just a ragged string really, tattered and bleeding out in this alley behind this club. one hand holding his guts in and the other raised at an awkward angle toward my stubby face. His touch is like popsicles on my skin. "Don't let us die out here," he squeaks. His eyes roll up in their sockets and it seems like he disappears, like his skin tightens right there. I lower him to the ground, gently laying him on a pile of newspapers and trash. I close his eyes and promise him a proper burial, that I'd come back when it's all over and take his body out to sea or scatter his ashes over some great mountain. It's a gentle lie, and I think to myself as I clutch my gun, rising to my feet. There are searchlights overhead. It's heavy and opaque all over with the radiant stitch of dark patrols heliports. I make my way up the alley, careful not to cast my shadow in their lights. It's not a lockdown, but I'm trying to keep a low profile. There's too many of them out here. Something's going down tonight. I can feel it in my gut. As the last heliport disappears over the bridge, their engines reduce to a safe hum. The streets seem quiet. Hollowed out sports cars and abandoned motorcycles for blocks, storefronts boarded up and rotting, some still emanating their husky dust and ash, pieces still falling. The occasional vagrant passes by with a shopping cart or something on fire, cackling, then tossing that fiery thing into a bus, a building, a dumpster. The whir of alarms stretch from all angles of the city and lurch down its streets. It's a sound that registers as infinitely more calming than the 3 seconds of silence before it. These streets are an abyss, a coiled snake choking itself on the husks of old subway cars, billowing smoke and foul steam cascading its prostitutes. These hustlers stay backlit by a piss-yellow glow of tech-spruced Cadillac headlights. The steady drum and thrum of bass music bursting out of shit-drenched tenements and muscle cars is an unnerving soundtrack. It's giving me a headache. I tuck further into my trench coat, the blood of the silver-clad boy slowly drying on my fingers. What was his name? Silver Soul, I think. I can't keep all of them straight anymore. No full memories that any of them ever happened. Just bits and pieces like distorted dreams. How they'd streak the air like shooting stars. Back then you could take your child to the park at night and watch them light up. Beautiful beacons. We were safe. They kept us. Yeah, Silver Soul. He could turn metal into light. He was Captain Starjack's sidekick. Just this wispy little sprite flitting in and out of hyperspace. Silver would turn entire tanks into flurries of light. Man, it was something. On a routine outing, the two of them, under attack by some nefarious, now-defunct corporation, I'm gonna say it was Amnodyne, was when all of this wonder, this dream life we lived, traversing the stars, only to come spraying back into the atmosphere, aglow, anew, it all crashed. Amnodyne, we'd all find out later, was somehow controlling the city. Its politics, its police officers, its private and public interest. If they didn't control it outright, they owned a heavy controlling interest in it. When Amnodyne's android minions attacked a hostel, laying into a group of boy travelers, Silver Soul saw red, unleashed an array of energies that annihilated a city block. He was inconsolably angry, pulsating with the chroma of the chaos. I remember Captain Starjack staring blankly into a news camera at the podium the day he announced his retirement, that they'd all be retiring, melting back into obscurity, and that some of them, the ones with the real power, would be working for a new corporation that would rise in Amnodyne's wake, take control, and lead us out of the coming darkness. They called it Dark Patrol. Yeah. Maximus, Killgirl, Vahena, White Star, G-Man. They all put on business suits and became the brainwashed henchmen of an international corporation that would strangle the life out of the city it swore to protect. Where I'm standing isn't the entrance to a club. Not really. It's a boarded up wall, wheat pasted with wanted posters seeking the capture of Kid Lightning, Girl of Thunder, Hippie John, Cold Wave, the Young Arrows Guild, Fangra, Blackbird, Silver Soul, dead or alive. I touched the boy's face again. On the poster, he's glowing, his smile looking sadder now than when that picture was taken. Some surly young men on junk motorcycles are rolling silently up and down the block. They're waving empty beer bottles around like Molotov cocktails. They've got pig snouts sewn into their flesh with enormous rings or pins made of human bones. The spikes in their jackets have all dulled or chipped away. They're all armed with square guns and satchel grenades. I try to stay out of the streetlight, just duck into the blackened jam of a nearby doorway and watch them motor on. Okay, I guess I'm going to stop right there. Yay, thank you.
Wow.
Whew.
Well, I feel very lifted from that.
That's a classic, like, Laser Life, John, I think.
Wow.
It's a very nostalgic Laser Life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who has been to a Laser Life before? Sweet.
Yeah.
Some of the crowd. Who knows about Metro Polarity or the times of like 2012, 2013? Okay, cool.
Can we talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
Do you have a question, or should we just start talking?
Well, it's up to y'all. You guys are driving the questions.
Okay, cool.
I'm mostly answering.
Yeah, I think Metro Polarity for me at the time was a way to create new narratives, new types of science fiction at a time when science fiction was starting to become very mainstream, and like the Marvel movies were starting to like take off and stuff.
Yeah.
I just tried to watch the Avengers the other day. It's so boring. It sucks. I didn't know. I did not even watch it. I only watched Black Panther, and I watched a lot of Spider-Man cartoons and stuff, and that's it. So I didn't know how bad it was. But that's like super boring. But anyway, yeah, I think all of us were a little bit tired of the types of narratives that were out there.
And alarmed, I would say.
Alarmed, yeah. I think we were starting to see like a lot of 90s and 80s sci-fi like imaginations coming into fruition. Even in the 70s too, like coming, like predictive policing and like all of these things that were just coming true. And like, why were people not making a concerted effort to create other narratives with the intention of them coming true? So
Yeah, like in 2012 and 2013 when we formed, first of all, I want to take it back to, we were all disparate writers around in the city, and by like listservs and Occupy and like random comings and goings, we managed to come together and doing Laser Life like Alex said, and then Metro Polarity formed in this way where we were putting out flyers and making memes and calling others to us and trying to find others to join us. And that went on for a while. So anyway, at that time, I feel like the science fiction was lots of William Gibson and like all the 1980s dystopian blockbuster movies like Total Recall and all these things were getting those ideas and those scenarios and those dystopian like spectacles were being returned to the forefront of like Hollywood from the 80s, I feel like, and nothing about the times had changed in them. Nothing about the outcomes or the stakes or what people do or what the corporations or whoever is abusing the power is in it. And the same stuff where it's like the main characters are soldiers, they're cops, they're elite trained individuals who work for the people in power, but they're like just all this really uncritical rehash. And then I don't know, I feel like Metro Polarity's whole thing and the strength of all of our individual works as writers was to be, and Alex has written a herald for Metro Polarity, which I brought posters that have it on the counter, that was saying all this stuff like, I forget, like, but it was like rallying against this shit, and you were saying we're the people who are in the back of the fucking, sorry I'm cursing, the mart where Indiana Jones or whoever is like running through and everybody else is in the back getting like shot and messed up.
I think one of the driving forces behind, and just me writing in general, was that, going back and rewatching Blade Runner and being like, damn, I'm actually a replicant, right? Like I'm not a Blade Runner. Like Blade Runner is the bad guy, right? And so sort of absorbing that as that's where that line comes from, like being in the we're the characters on the margins, we're the characters in the bazaar who sort of pepper movies like Blade Runner with our otherness, our queerness, our indigeneity, our blackness, our brownness, right? And our sort of like orientalness or whatever. And this white man, this straight white man, is sort of navigating through this whole thing, and everything is, he's being put upon by our culture and our counterculture. So just like relating more to the replicants on my more adult viewing of that film, sort of that was a moment where I was bridging my political beliefs of like being like this kind of like far left anarchist black power dude, right? And then just kind of merging that with like queerness, and then seeing like the nerd shit that I was into and being like, whoa, I really have to question a lot of this, because when you're young, you just kind of like, oh, the good guys and the bad guys. But I think science fiction is like kind of like how you alluded to. Science fiction is predictive. Science fiction is powerful. Science fiction is that book bag, which is beautiful. And science fiction is like science fiction is like something that we are all living in 24/7, because and I can go even further back, but the priests and the storytellers in Africa who would tell stories, and sort of like enlighten the people. That's kind of like what storytellers are now. And so I take that very seriously, like through all of my art. And like, I feel like we did that as a Metropolarity. We were like, so if these things are coming true, if like predictive text and AI and surveillance and like all this crazy wild stuff, and like Monsanto, I think, was doing a lot of crazy stuff at the time that we were really, and Martin Shkreli and all these guys were around, and we were just like, how do we affect the world, and like what can we actually actively say, but also still make dope characters and like have fun and shoot laser guns, right? Like that's still a part of it. But like I'm very adamant about the like science, the fiction part of the science fiction, as well as the science and the politics and the 1984 of everything. But like, because I think that fun part is what we're striving for, is the utopia, not the utopia, but like the nowtopia, to coin another phrase that we invented, is what we're striving for, right? So.
Yeah, I think another aspect of what was happening when Metropolarity formed and in like the 5 years after that is that we, along with Rashida was doing something called the Afrofuturist Affair, which was, if anyone, I know Warren, you're here, if anyone's been to the Afrofuturist Affair, it was an intensely beautiful, stunning spectacle of Afrofuturists all around Philadelphia coming out to an event to raise money for a charity of some kind, or a cause of some kind, a grassroots cause of some kind that needed support, is usually Black woman-led. So Rashida started the Afrofuturist Affair. It was a costume ball, and you would just dress like cosplay in your, not as a character necessarily, but as your character in your nowtopia, in your future, as a Black person. And so I think that the Afrofuturist Affair, before any of this, was probably the first time I read a story in the style that I now carry, that Metropolarity has helped me to develop, which is like part trolling a little bit, and like part like, utilizing all the advertisements and all of the like media and messaging that we walk through in Philadelphia, particularly, not just like randomly throwing together random like marginalized people, put them in under some blue neon lights and like, yeah, we're in the city, like right. Not like Blade Runner, but like literally like hearing the SEPTA dings and like, all of the things that are making our reality this surrealistic, beautiful future now that we're living in. And so Afrofuturist Affair, I feel like, showed me the beauty and joy of a potential future that we could create in the now as during an event. So not just, and then so when Laser Life also had that feeling of like, whenever we were together, we were able to create a space that felt like a portal, but a mirror, but like it's here, it's now, it's not fake. It's not, we're not cosplaying. We're all telling the truth about who we are when we come to these events. And it felt very like griot, very like fireside storytelling. Let's share our scary stories type thing.
Like a satsang kind of.
Yeah, and they all, yes, they told little like stories and lessons and parables, but it wasn't like, you know, some of the other, I would say Afrofuturists, like on-trend Afrofuturist writers that were out starting to emerge at the time were very much about like, I want to tell this maybe like political story to like teach you guys about XYZ thing, but the actual fun and the fabulism of it and like the truth of living in Philly, which is a very like a place where people make themselves and they don't have to like be anything but themselves, and that in itself is a powerful thing, you know. And I remember when Metropolarity we released our first zine, we intended for community members to submit their own versions of a future that they were creating or wanted to create. I'm remembering like one of Shane's stories that I used to love, that was about the phone. I think it was called Hello Hello. Do you remember what it was called? I don't know what it's called. But it was like, I remember Shane reading one night at Laser Life, and it was just a very immersive, very different than some of the literary circles that had been around at the time, which were just like reading like, you know, literary fiction, usually something tear-jerking, maybe like a white person would go, remember a white person going to Mexico and finding themselves through cuisine, and then coming back and then realizing that they wanted to adopt a brown child in California. And I'm like, whoo, like I can't go to these no more. Like I actually can't do it.
For me, it was like, I told Leah this so many times, but for me, it was like going to this poetry reading and this lady was reading Mandingo poetry about Kanye West. I was like, I think I might be done with like poetry. It was very weird. It was not, and that's not a diss on poetry. It's just like the intention. Well, I guess it kind of is, but the intentionality is like just different because you're trying to affect like a possible future and a possible narrative for yourself, and not just like get some shit off your chest. You know what I mean? Like there's so much more, like many layers involved. Like, and I love what you're saying about writing science fiction that feels immersive. But it's not just like, oh, we're gonna make Star Wars, but everybody's black. It's more like being immersive. Like one of my favorite characters of yours were like stealing Timberlands out of a Burlington coat factory one day. So it's kind of like that kind of stuff is what I aspire. Those kinds of characters are the kinds that I want, whose story I want to tell.
Well, yeah, it makes me also think of the way, because I was like doing a lot of online promoting and I like do this for work anyway, so I'm always like thinking of slogans and things. And anyway, I was like, what's the thing in common with all of our writing is that we're like really, really, really not trying to perpetuate the fantasies of empire and the fantasies of like the U.S. capitalist American like white supremacist like fantasy,
Type shit.
And yeah, like what you just said, where it's like, oh, we're gonna make Star Wars, but everybody's gonna be black, and it's like, well, okay, but did anybody think about what the representations of all the imperial powers is about, and like, what are the rebels really doing, and can people interpret this all willy-nilly because everything is is ambiguous, like how people now who fuck with Star Wars are like very imperialist and very capitalist and like anti-black, and they'll be like, oh yeah, the rebels or whatever. Like, I don't know. So for me, I felt like all our stories were expressing like this very deep need to have a world where none of that shit is happening. The people who represent us and like where we come from and the places we go and the stuff we want to see in the world are like very expansively expressed in detail in the way that you don't see places in various areas. But what I also wanted to put a pin back on was that when we started reading and everything, people who were nerds, or like I had this one like Tumblr mutual who was like, Metropolarity is actually nerds, and like, they're not these literary authors
Right.
playing with science fiction, and their books get genred as fiction, but you know what happens to everybody else? They're not playing around. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah,
But we
No,
can
I was
talk
gonna say
about your
like
book again.
just the idea of just being straight up nerds is like I actually started writing science fiction through comic books and through like 1980s cartoons like He-Man and Silverhawks and stuff like that. So, you know, I never read Heinlein and I never read like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or any of that, like anything that I was supposed to read until I discovered black science fiction writers. And then I was like, oh, wow. And so when this like weird dude who used to pretend he wanted to be my editor or whatever back in like the 90s gave me a copy of Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand by Samuel Delany, that sort of changed my life. That sort of like introduced me into science fiction, whereas before the literary stuff that I was reading was stuff like, I don't know, like Toni Morrison and David Foster Wallace and Ishmael Reed and like Haruki Murakami and like things like that. Like I would read like postmodern stuff, J.G. Ballard all the time. But I never read the sort of diehard science fiction because I always felt like there was a sort of like fascistic, almost white power sort of narrative running through a lot of it, especially in fantasy. And so I avoided it. But then when I discovered Samuel Delany, you know, Nalo Hopkinson, Octavia Butler, it shifted and I started to gravitate more towards putting my narrative energy into like prose as opposed to poetry and comic books and stuff. So
can I ask you how we used to do like we do like writing workshops and things like that. How do those other engagements develop your craft and develop your voice?
Oh, big time. Especially working with y'all. It's something that Monk was alluding to. The whole idea about being against empire. I really have been thinking a lot about that lately. And you know, when Monk was presenting that and those ideas through workshops, I definitely incorporated those into the workshops that that I was leading as well. Just trying to get like younger people, especially, to sort of look at the anime they're watching, the TV shows they're watching, and to like understand where the power is coming from, and understand that, like, you know, for instance, Stranger Things. The character Hopper, I don't know if you guys follow Stranger Things, but the character Hopper to me feels superfluous. Like, he feels wholly unnecessary to the narrative because he doesn't do anything, but he's just like a cop. So he's like able to like have, like, it's like gives the kids a sort of like authority figure and sort of takes some of their power away. And so just constantly trying to like reimagine what superheroes and science fiction heroes can be, that's something that really affected me about doing the workshops. And then just seeing how I just did one in Minnesota, and just seeing how kids are like absolutely eager to see themselves in these roles, but they're like afraid, right? Like they're a little intimidated by it. Like I posted some pictures of the comic book I do, Black Vans, and a friend of mine like laugh emoji reacted to it or whatever, and I'm like, and that was a little disappointing for me because he wasn't able to see himself as heroic. Like all the characters that I posted were fat, black, queer characters, and he wasn't able to see himself like in those images, and he's just thought it was kind of a kiki. But like if you read the comic, they're getting down. And so it's just about rechanging those narratives, I think.
Woo, yeah. Well, okay, so
It's a journey. Like when I was a kid, I used to draw and write all white characters, and it took me a long time. It took me into my adulthood to be like, first it was like I drew all white characters, and then I was like politicized really early, and I wasn't incorporating any of this into my nerddom. And then it was like, oh, well, then I'll sprinkle some black characters and maybe one gay character. Oh, maybe I'll do more than that. And then now I'm just like, I don't want to write no white people. I don't want to write any white characters. So it's been a journey. So
shit. Well, I wanted to say that listening to you read this story tonight had me feeling a lot of like palpable nearness of like threats of violence and political outcomes and things that are, you know, circulating all around us through the news and like stuff that's like pressurizing society or whatever the hell. And I know that sometimes I've been like, oh God, something I wrote a while ago is too close to something, or do people realize how sort of like urgent it was the first time I said it and I'm looking at this again, or I'm kind of wondering how people are taking your stories now that you've been like, I guess this is the first book release, but you've been out and about with it, right? Recently?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like Cherie Renee Thomas, who does fantasy and science fiction. She's the editor, the first black woman editor of that very prestigious magazine. She's really into ARKDust a lot. And that's so funny because these stories are ancient when you think about it. Like the horror story that's in here was literally the story that I wrote pre-Laser Life. Obviously, it's been edited and changed a little bit. But yeah, it's been very visceral. People have been very excited about it. And I think what most people like about it is that it's not like bogged down in a lot of backstory. It just kind of like, God, this is gonna sound so cheesy, but it's like a fuel injection or whatever. It's like, you know what I'm talking about? It's like a laser, like guided missile or something.
ARKDust.
Right, like you just like jack into it or whatever. It's like, I don't know. It's very like dark webby 1997, like Angelina Jolie. This fell out of her back pocket as she's being arrested by like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, that's kind of how I try to like write, like,
she wishes.
Yeah, right. Like what's on the like free table at like, you know, the Foot Clan's like hideout or whatever. Like, you know, what are Rocksteady and Bebop reading on their way to Danceteria? You know, like that's pretty much like my audience, right? Yes. But black and gay, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing. Like, what if really Ninja was like a literal ninja? Right, so a point of pride is that like there's a story in here, and it's about a trans woman's journey and her conflict with her mom, and it's relating it to the sort of like half decade of a black liberation struggle, right? And I think it's the only science fiction story with like a Vogue battle, so I'm pretty proud of that. That predated a lot of the like. And I was worried about a lot of that too. Right when I was doing the initial run of this, so that story, the chapters are titled after the 10-point program of the Black Panther Party. So I was a little nervous that people were going to be like, he just wrote that story because Beyonce did the Black Panther salute or whatever. And so it's kind of like, it's interesting that like while we were doing our thing and like influencing a lot of people, like, and then those people were influencing those more people and more people. So, you know, and you know how it is. Like we're all just now sort of like reaping the benefits of shit that we sowed back in like 2010, right? So, but other people have made larger strides. Like Beyonce is a cultural cherry picker, so she's got the resources that she's able to cherry pick people and sort of claim these things. So I was worried that like people would read this story and be like, he's biting off of what Kendrick Lamar and Beyonce were doing at the time. And then now that Vogue's popular, I'm not quite worried that people are going to be like, oh, you know, you watched the season of Pose, and now you think you can. But you know, like I've been voguing since like '96, so it's like whatever. Like I used to walk old school for like half a week until I realized that I was not that good at it, and I had like 2 moves. So anyway, but yeah, just little things like that. And there's actually a story in here, The Girls Who Look Through Glass, which was from a split zine with More Mother. It's basically there's an episode of Lovecraft Country that is like a beat-free retelling of that story. But this story is like my story is like super ancient. from like 2014. But like that episode of Lovecraft Country where she goes to meet a metal woman. My character is also whisked away by a metal woman, and she's transported into the African veldt or whatever, and so is my character. And my character is about to fight a bunch of white dudes, and so is the character in Lovecraft Country, that Lovecraft Country episode. And right when she's about to fight them, she teleports back into the present day. And the same thing happens in my story. So it's just been like, that's kind of weird. I don't think people caught on to it or whatever, but it's just a weird coincidence. And it's interesting to see, like, a lot of the stuff that I worked on in the past, like, decade plus, like, make it to Hollywood and see how it's becoming, I guess, adapted and then co-opted. Like, Black Panther's great, but again, that story is just about the kings and the queens, right? Yeah. I was talking to Shane after we watched it, and I said, what happened? What about the regular people that work at like the Starbucks in Wakanda? Like, don't they have stories? Maybe there's a mutant who just got their powers, and we can tell the story about this kid that's getting bullied in Wakanda, or like, what about the kid that works at like the bookstore in Wakanda? Like, don't they have does no one have a story to tell other than like the kings and the queens? So it's something to think about. I think it's something to really, really think about, and like think about not just can we tell that story, but like why aren't they, the infamous they, ominous they, why aren't they telling that story as well? So that was a long-winded answer to your question. Are we good on time? Does anybody in the audience have questions? I guess we should maybe open it up.
Yeah.
I can do the Ricky Lake thing and just be like, I always wanted to do that too. Like,
I have a
hi, what's your name? Susan from Denver? Okay. I always wanted to do that. That's like my favorite part of those shows. It's like they be running, bro. They be running.
I
Bro.
had a question for the audience.
Ooh, this is a twist.
If anyone had any memories of the Laser Life or any other engagements with Alex's work or Much Clarity's work that they wanted to share, and maybe we could Ricky Lake that.
Yeah, let's Ricky Lake some shit. Any questions? That is true. Oh, we could. Okay, awesome. Well, you can.
Oh, yeah. Who are you? Where are you from? Thank you. I'm from New Jersey, and I live here for the past 10 years. My name is Annie Mock, and it was my birthday 2 days ago.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So me and Alex did a short comic for the Image Comics anthology Island, with an editor turned out to be a shitbag, but the comic was good. The editor didn't edit anything, which was part of the reason he was shitty. But we got paid okay. And it was a story, you can read it online still. It's called Avia. It's a very beautiful story. I did an okay job. I'm very happy with the job I did on certain panels. I really love Alex's writing in it. I feel like I learned a lot from that experience. He produced this story that was kind of a little bit X-Men inflected, but even more like obviously much more like down to earth and grounded in this like Philadelphian reality that I knew a little bit because I was living there at the time. In West Philly. I was living in West Philly at the time. I'm living in East Kensington now. I'm looking for housemates, free housemates, if anybody wants to move. Yeah, I just, I don't know. Every time I see you read, every time I read your work, it just fills me up with this like breath of life.
Yeah.
And really appreciate your presence, and I know everybody else does too. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Down there.
Okay. This is so fun. I'm like totally getting my Oprah on. What's your name?
Susie Subway.
And where you from?
I'm from Philadelphia. And the first time I saw you guys read, there was a writer who was on tour with a book, and the A space was completely packed. I was sitting on the floor, kind of behind someone who was in a chair, but I was just like hanging on everywhere. I was like amazing because you guys were like reading about like people from Philly, like who were like, growing up in Philly and dealing with superpowers and dealing like smoking weed and like skateboarding, and I was like, this is amazing. And it was also very political, and so it was just magic. And I had never read sci-fi before, like I had not. And then after that, since then, I've been reading sci-fi. So I just thank you guys so much. Are you going to do another Laser Life?
That is a good question. Yes. I'd like to do it here too, not to put on your spot. But yeah, we definitely want to do it. We're definitely going to do stuff like that. And yeah, it's because it's in us and it fuels us. And, you know, it's really awesome. Also, you read at Laser Life. And yeah, you had one of the top 5 lines in Laser Life history too. It was a story. I can't quite remember exactly what the story was, but these two people, one of them was a cyborg, and she was complaining about the other one being super attached to this like one implement, and she was like, "You got to take that out." And then the person was like, "But I need it for work." And for some reason, that just killed me. Like I just laughed so hard at that line because it was like so perfect, and it's also kind of like very prescient. Talking about like how we are operating today, like we all are attached to our phones, to our laptops, and you know we had a pandemic and we still couldn't get away from being like sucked into the machine. So I don't know, it's something to think about. But yeah.
Okay. I also want to say that Susie wrote Yolanda, this short story, in one of our zines. So we have a zine called the Journal of, what is it, Speculative Vision and Critical Liberation Technologies, that we collected a lot of people's, Warren, you had some work in there too. We collected a lot of people's work, like neighbors in Philadelphia, and it was nice to put out a call for submissions that didn't require any, you know, past experience or anything like that. And that was really nice because we got a bunch of different stories from like high school classmates, moms, and stuff like that. Just like intergenerational and cool, and I just really appreciate that experience.
It was all city. Like it wasn't really the submissions we got weren't really concentrated from one place. It was like genuinely from all corners of the city, and I was like, thank God. Dot.
But yeah, I want to shout out Susie. Had some of the funniest stories.
Yeah, Susie, wow.
Really, really good.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Any other questions? Oh yeah.
What?
Hi, I'm Petra from Philadelphia.
Woo.
From Albany.
Albany. Okay.
Yeah, I on my way here with my buddy Aya, I was just like, right, like I remember graduating from undergrad in 2012, moving back into the city, and I don't know which constellation of you guys I saw, but like feeling like you guys had been doing what you'd been doing already for like 10 years, but then like now in this current moment realizing that, oh, y'all had just gotten started together like at that moment. Is this a weird sense of time that I have with you all as I've gotten to know you all? But a question I wanted to ask was about editing. I'm someone who's just come out of art school. I'm going to be processing that experience for a while. And yeah, like, have you found, I'm hoping you found your good editors, your good readers, you know, but like, yeah, can you describe like meeting them or meeting one or whatever, or what you've really appreciated about those relationships or what they've brought to your writing that you needed? I'm curious about that.
So one of my top editors was Nishi Saul. Yeah, I know. Like, she's beautiful and amazing, and she became one of my editors and friends through this anthology that was also put out by Rosarium called Stories for Chip, and she really advocated for my story, which is funny because the story that got into that anthology is not in this book because it's in that anthology, but it's also where it also has the titular line in ARKDust. It has the word ARKDust in it. So like, it's always been something that I've always been kind of weird about. That. But anyway, she was very helpful and gracious. And the thing about editing is that you have to be like super open and like understand the intent of the project that you're working on, and if it doesn't fit the intent of the project, then it might not fit exactly what you need at that moment. I just had a huge editing, like 2 months of back and forth with this other anthology that I'm in. It's about black punk rockers, and Soft Skull Press is putting it out. So I wrote this piece, and then I added like a whole bunch of elements in it, and then of course they took all of those elements that I added right out of it. They were like, "This doesn't make sense," and I kept rereading it, and then something just kind of hit me that like they were absolutely right, that these elements that I put into the story didn't fit, and I needed to figure out how to incorporate my sense of surrealism back into the stuff that I had already written. And I needed to figure out how to clarify certain things. And like, you know, there's little things like if you're writing science fiction, one thing that Nisi told me was that like, you can't say something like if Bob is going to cry, you can't say Bob's face turned into something because you're writing science fiction, so the reader might think that he's literally turning into this thing. Just little things like that, like trying to come to an understanding of like certain things work in certain contexts and other things don't work in that context. I never really had a personal editor until I started submitting, and then each person that I submitted to had their own in-house editor. So that worked for me. Always get people to read your stuff for sensitivity reasons. That's a huge thing. Two of the stories in ARKDust has a, how do I put this, not own voice story that has two trans narratives in it. And there's stuff about transitioning in there. So I'm not just writing a trans character. So I wanted to make sure that those stories felt like something that I could publish and not feel like I was taking the voice away from someone, or that I was like taking control of this narrative, right? And I feel like I did a good job, and the people that read it, I think Leah read it for me, said that I was doing a really good job. And someone on Goodreads said that one of the stories in here that does have that narrative said it's the best story about that features elements about transitioning written by someone who is not trans that they've ever read. So that felt really good to me. But it took a lot of work to get those stories to that place. So that's just one example. Like if you're, again, Nisi does a workshop called Writing the Other, and I think you can look that up online, where she talks about how you can write from the, not really from the perspective, but how you can write characters that aren't you into your story and still have them feel real and believed and not take away their voice. And also she advocates that you should do that because, and I advocate that too, because you could say that, oh, you're a straight cis white man, you can't write any characters of color. But then if that was true, then Lovecraft Country wouldn't have made it on the screen, and then we wouldn't have had the fallout and the residual like power that Lovecraft Country produced, right? Because it's not like they're going to just be like looking for another black author. It's like, but at the same time, like that show got people jobs. That show got people, the actors, the producers, the writers' room were mostly women of color. So, and the people behind the camera were people of color. So that show got people jobs, and the original source material is written by a cis white man. So, like, to me, writing the other, as Nishi puts it, is essential, and she has a guideline to show you how. So it's like, it's finding those guidelines and finding those pathways towards doing it in the context. Warren, did you have a question? I didn't mean to put you, I thought I saw your hand up. Yeah. I guess this is the last one. I don't know. Are we doing okay? Okay.
First of all, it's great to be able to see all of y'all like up on stage again. I've enjoyed your work for many years, you know. One thing that I've always appreciated out of Metropolarity, and in particular out of what you do, Alex, is how it feels boundless when it comes to just like medium and sound, and especially doing that with fiction, period, and with science fiction especially, is it's a hard thing to do, and it's like a lot of people aren't, like, I think, creatively brave enough to do it. So after all of this time, what do you feel about just like as an artist in terms of focus, in terms of vision, of just like taking all of these different types of elements and making them into your art?
I feel so. I don't know. There's a mixed bag, I guess. Like, I feel empowered, and like a little bit braver, right? And I feel like one of the reasons why I do a lot of multimedia stuff is I can't focus on one idea. Like, I've got like so many things. I got like my collage art, my writing, my music. So I tried to create like with the Afterverse, right? Like a home where I could like concentrate on all those things at once. So it's all from the same sort of like visual language. And so my solution to like try to figure out like which thing I should do is to like do all of them, but do all of them in like a family of movements, right? So you can see the collage art in ARKDust, especially in the first one. You could see my ideas. Oh, I hate this word branding, but because it's not really that, right? It's not really that. It's like aesthetic. It's like family of ideas that like just have been pulsing through me since I was like 8 years old, and trying to like continuously remix and remaster those sort of same ideas, but keep bringing in new stuff at the same time. So yeah, like, I appreciate that question, but yeah, that's just, it's hard because I'm all over the place. I'm kind of a Libra in a lot of ways. I guess with that, I'm more like, my brain is more Aquarius, but my heart is more Libra. I don't know how that stuff works, but like, I don't know. It's just one of those things that like I'm constantly trying to like remaster and reinvigorate what I've already done with like new projects all the time. So I'm trying to narrow it down a little bit, but yeah, that's basically where I'm at. Anyone else?
Oh, it's just a little. Whoa. Oh yeah, my name is Lane. I'm from New Jersey. What? From New Jersey. Oh yeah. Well, yeah. That's why we have to sit over here. No, it's kind of similar to Susie's story, where I saw Metropolarity. I think all of you were there, and a few others. Like, it must have been like 7 or 8 years ago. And I mean, I'd been writing for a long time, like, but I never really thought about my writing as like art, or that's something that someone else would want to read. And anyway, I remember asking, because I've only been able to kind of write about my life, and I really wanted to write stories, and I really wanted to write science fiction stories. That's what I loved reading the most. And I remember asking, like, how do you do it's a really dumb question. It was like, how do you do that?
I think I might remember that.
Was
I there? Was I at that one?
It was at Vox.
Oh yeah, I think I kind of remember that. That was the That was Erasure, I think, actually. Yeah, I think that was Erasure. Yeah.
I could look it up probably, but yeah, I remember it was like you were all really cool, and like intimidating, and it was really dark in there too. So everyone was like backlit, and it was like, and I think it might have been
James Cameron-esque.
Yeah. Well, not nice, but you were like, our lives are science fiction. Like, you went on this whole thing, and I was like, okay. But no, I mean, and it's true, and here we are now. I don't know. I feel lucky to be here with all of you. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm. Oh, sorry.
Wait, you Oh my God. Okay. Sure.
Monk organized a online writing retreat. I would call it like a retreat, a very disciplined one where we would meet. This is during the last year and the year before, I think, too, right? We've had a couple iterations, and they have just been really, really wonderful, like writing experiences where we like hit the ground and like just wrote and like had prompts and had like deep conversation and even had some conflict that we were able to like get through in a way that like made my writing better. So yeah, and Lane has been a part of that. So just want to put that out there. Still creating stuff.
I'm just going to add that this was in response to Petra's thing about editing, is that like kind of if you don't have editors and if you don't even have finished pieces that you could submit to somewhere to get an editor, just trying to get some people around you to do the same thing and then be like, will you read the like 120 words I wrote? And then it's small pieces, small steps.
Thank you. All right. My name is Christina. I'm also from New Jersey. I've lived here for 10 years, but now I live in New York. Right? Yeah. I'm like, I think, yeah, I live in New York. My question was, Alex, what are you working on right now? Because there's a second issue already of Black Vans, right? That already came out, or it's going to come out? Yeah, it came out.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm in the I'm in the middle of doing a 4-issue comic book called Black Vans. It's about these queer hackers who provide intel and communications for superheroes. Mostly characters of color. The main character is a gay bear, I guess. Bo, he's a Afro-Latino, and he's kind of a screw up, and all the superheroes start disappearing. So that leaves the hackers, the guys in the vans, the guys and the girls in the vans to try to save the day. So yeah, it's a 4-issue series drawn by James Dillenbeck. Inspired by all the stuff we've been talking about so far today. X-Men, Akira, Blade Runner, Gotcha Man, Voltron, all that stuff. Mobius, Grant Morrison's Invisibles, The Matrix, pretty much anything you can think of is like kind of kitchen sinked into this comic book. And but run through a very queer, very POC lens, and yeah, it's been really fun. So we're doing the next 2 issues, should come out next year. I'm also working on a hip hop album. It's like just my version of it. Very noisy, very weird, very East Coast sounding. With it'll be very different. I guess like Public Enemy, Saul Williams meets mid-period MIA, but through my science fiction-y kind of vibe. So I'm doing that, and a bunch of other little tiny projects. Like I have a split zine coming out with Alex Jennings from New Orleans, who wrote a book called The Ballad of Perilous Graves. And then I have the story coming out, I think, later next year in an anthology that Chris Terry is doing. He's a great writer, and he's doing it on South Skull Press, and it'll be about Black and African diaspora presence in the punk rock movement. I think those are my main projects right now as far as literary stuff goes. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And where can we find all of you on the internet? Or otherwise, or in the bookstore, you know what I mean?
I'm at They Are Birds on Instagram. I think I'm phasing out of Twitter, but I'm at They Are Birds on Instagram. And yeah, I post all the time. You can follow me there. Yeah.
I'm at Raz Cutlass on Instagram and Deep Space Mine 215 on Instagram.
Also, we have like actual URLs, like there's metropolarity.net, which is more of an archive at this point, and Alex has alexoteric.net. or .com?
Oh, I totally forgot. I think it's
Ooh.
it's .com. It's .com.
Okay.
Yeah, it's .com. Mm-hmm.
And I'm cyborgmemoirs.com and
I think. Let me read.
I'm cutlasstheory.com.
I don't know. Hit us up. Talk to us.
Yeah.
We're busy and decrepit. I'm speaking for myself and just love to connect. Wait, what was the last hot, rip-roaring, sci-fi type speculative, like mass media, or like, what was the last good thing you read, sir, saw, heard? That you would be like, other people should.
There's been some interesting things. There's a lot. It's kind of like what you're saying right now. There's a lot of black science fiction literature out there, but a lot of it seems to be like definitely like kind of message driven in a lot of ways. And it seems to be like the opposite of what someone else had described ARKDust in this kind of like sort of there's not enough like explosive, expressive like ideas. I think it's because people are kind of trying to survive, and so that's definitely been a part of it. But I'll read the work of like Nikki Drayden. There's a really good book called Riot Baby that I just read that was pretty cool. And I think movie-wise, I really liked Everything Everywhere All at Once this year. That was really cool. I haven't seen a good show in a while though, so I'm trying to think. What show was it? I feel like there was something that was really great, but I can't remember exactly what it was. I've watched a lot of shows. There's a lot of like kind of like mediocre stuff out there right now. But, yeah. Huey, what's up? Yeah. Do you need a mic? All right, bet.
So yeah, just I guess some advice. Yeah, I didn't even know that the whole like metropolarity. It's been so interesting, like learning about everything. Yeah, like one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and y'all kind of touched on this a bit, but like as someone who comes to kind of like writing science fiction and stuff from like more of like a political like essayist background, I'm always kind of curious on how one writes stuff that's kind of like like creative and stuff without being like preachy. I hate to say that, but I feel like I've shown some of my work to people and they've been like, you got to be like less preachy, and like I feel that, right? I think there's something about like the cool, like how do you, I don't know, that's like a really broad question, but
I got a million thoughts on that, but
I know that's like a whole. We've done whole talks on that, but like, how can I do it really fast? I would say, one, don't worry if it's too preachy. Sometimes it's just going to have to be. That's one thing. Two, like, sometimes what people think is preachy is really just you kind of claiming a space that wasn't there before. So it's kind of like how people think that because every character in Lovecraft Country, for instance, is black, that means it's woke. It doesn't mean it's woke. It just means you haven't seen that before. So that's another thing. And three, sometimes like the subtlety is in like what you don't say. So I'm trying to think of examples. Like the story that I read, I guess. That story was basically the way that I was trying to tackle the ideas that we were talking about earlier about how these Blade Runner type characters, like the white guy in the trench coat, sort of like navigates through the world. So sometimes you have to show the world through the eyes of someone who we haven't ever seen it, before. So, and like satire is very hard to pull off. It's very difficult, and sometimes it'll feel like you're just like doing the thing that you're trying to preach against. But I think in order to avoid sounding quote unquote preachy, another thing you can do is just have your characters totally mess up. Like if your character isn't like completely 100% this Jesus figure, sometimes they screw up. Sometimes they have bad ideas, and sometimes those ideas come to bite them in the butt, right? Sometimes they are striving for something that they shouldn't be striving for, and that's where your criticism and your critique can come in without having it feeling overwhelming. So if your character is just shouting down the man like all the time in your story, like it gets boring. It gets like no one wants to read that. So I think you should just kind of try to write as best you can about regular people going through things, and don't write about anarchists or whatever. Like, don't write about communists. Like, just write about regular people going through life, and I think the politics will come out in a more naturalistic way. So, yeah. Like, if you had to choose a job for your character, I would choose, and you wanted to be street level, someone that lives in West Philly maybe, I would choose like, a barista or like someone from the block who sells weed over like someone that works at a nonprofit or something. Because the person that works at a nonprofit probably thinks they have all the answers. And we don't get to experience the stuff happening to them, to the character, because they already have the answers to everything. And they're just shouting at authority. So character selection is a huge part of it as well. Anything to add, friends?
I would say, like lean into it. Like this is the troll part of my writing that I've developed so much over Metro Polarity's tenure, is just like if they're saying it's preachy, why don't you write a preacher character? Why don't you write a sermon? Why don't you write a cult leader? Like just write it so that it feels fun. And it could be your exact same words, but make it fun. Like make it so that's fun for you. And I think the ultimate thing is you have to create, if you're trying to, I don't know if you're trying to make fiction or more surrealistic prose or something like that, but in any case, create a character, and the character doesn't have to be you, so you don't have to feel like you're being preachy if they're talking about you. Like you can be like, this is my character, and this is a character that wants to say these things. So I think that's my advice on that.
I guess my advice is to sort of like read around. I feel like so this is the like annoyance, I love to complain type aspect, but I've read a bit of science fiction written by activists and people who are coming from organizing backgrounds, and I always feel like they haven't watched enough anime or read enough shitty romance novels where there's like a haunting by a creeper at the abortion clinic. Like they haven't jellied out their minds enough or something like that. And I'm always like, guys, like read, people told people, what's that? Loosen up and sort of like remember that anything's possible in your world. And do you want to, in this story, like re-establish all the establishments from this world? Because you have so much freedom to not do that. So I'm like, if they're preaching like what's really happening or whatever, y'all said the good stuff already, so I'll keep it nice and stop there.
And this is not to say don't ever do that, because the story that I read actually does this, but try to avoid dystopia. Not just because it's like overdone, but like a lot of times when people write dystopia, they're like, this is what could happen, but like a lot of times it's like white people writing it and it's like, this is already happening, so it's not really a dystopia for like 90% of us, so it's what's happening now. So like I would avoid dystopia because it's like it creates a false sense of narrative, and also avoid euphemism and hyperbole, because for instance, like if you wrote a story where there were fairies that live amongst us, and the fairies were oppressed, and the fairies are pulled over by the cops, and you with the pointy ears, get off of my block. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of like palette swap for racism is just so annoying. So like you can have fairy characters, but they should also be we should also be talking about like our real world problems, right? Like our real world stuff, and just doing a palette swap metaphor for marginalized people doesn't always work. It's like someone compared my story to the X-Men earlier, and like I take elements of the X-Men, but like actually involve like marginalized people. Like there's two black X-Men, and like it's supposed to be this metaphor for racism, but there's like two black X-Men. It's like, come on,
That's
you know.
wild.
So just that's another point of advice that I would have for people who feel like their writing might be a little too on the preachier side. Is to like avoid these massive. And avoid the whole thing where it's like all the fairies are good, you know, and then like all of the like I don't know, maybe there's trolls in the universe too, and all the trolls are like the evil. Like avoid these like massive, weighty good versus evil narratives too.
Yeah, and I feel like if you like indulge in the canon, the various canons from like fan fiction to comics and indie games and all this stuff, people have already told these stories 100 times over since the last century, since the 19th century started, and like, I don't know, not to be like, you better read up on the canon before you can write, because Samuel Delany is like, you better read up on all the Russian classics before you write, and I'm like, I cannot. So,
and I will not.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's just so much that's been done that I don't know. It's like a big long history of this stuff, and just like poking around, because I feel like a lot of politics, for whatever reason, has kept itself separate from the like lowbrow arts or the arts of like, because before, as an aside, before I was writing, I was like writing fan fiction and watching anime, and when I started to write my own stories, I was not really familiar with the canon of science fiction writing, of literature, of the literary publishing industry and all these things. So I feel like I lost my whole train of thought. But just this goes to say, like, whatever you're coming from, like, there's so much out there that I lost the train of thought.
And just have fun. Have fun too.
Basically.
Just explosions and monsters and lasers. There's nothing wrong with that stuff. It's like, but it's kind of like, what if there was a monster? Like, why would we immediately try to kill it? Like, what if there are lasers? Who gets to own these lasers?
Oh.
Like, who gets to, like, what if lasers are on the street, right? Like, what if, like, you know, and, you know, that kind of thing. Like, if there was a portal somewhere, would NASA own the portal? Would the FBI and the CIA and the NSA, would they all own the portal? Or did, like, regular people get to use the portal? Like, who gets to use it? Power structure and power dynamics are in all of these science fiction things that we take for granted. So those are all avenues to explore, and they can relate to how power structures affect us now. Like right now, who owns the power grid? Who owns the highways, right? Like all of these things are, who owns medicine, right? No one can get medicine, but like who's making a profit off of it? Medicine is like these magic pills, right? So that's another area that we can explore. Just, yeah. Everything can be fun and politicized at the same time. And maybe that's a good place to end, I think. So. Thank you, friends. I guess buy books from Making Worlds. Yeah. I'll sign it if you name it.
Fabulous book signings with Alex Smith.
Thank you guys. Thanks, Making Worlds, for having us.
Yes, thank you, Making Worlds. Thanks to everybody who came out tonight.
so we am. So we are need a so we am. So we are, oh, so we are. So we are need a so we are. So we are. So we are. So we are. Take a look at these hands. Take a look at these hands. The hand speaks. The hand of a government man. Well, let me talk loud. Burn all the punches. All I want is to breathe. Won't you breathe with me? Find a little space, so we move in between and keep one step ahead of yourself. Don't you miss it? Don't you miss it? Some of y'all people just about missed it. So we are need as so we are. Last time to make plans. So we are. I'm a taller. So we are. I'm a government man. Never seen anything like that before. For the bodies tumble across the floor. I'm a taller. When you get to where you wanna be. Thank you, thank you. When you get to where you wanna be. Don't even mention it. Take a look at these hands passing in between us. Take a look at these hands. Take a look at these hands. They don't have to mention it. No thanks. I'm a government man. And the heat goes on where the hand has been. And the heat goes on, and the heat goes on. I'm gonna drown in man, and I'm gonna burn in building. I'm a tell drowning cannot hurt a man. Fire cannot hurt a man. Still waiting. Still waiting. Lost my ship, trying to act casual. Can't stop. I might end up in the hospital, changing my shape. I feel like an accident. They're back to explain their experience. Isn't it weird? Looks too obscure to live, to live. I push the fact in front of me. Facts lost. Facts are never what it seems to be. Oh, nothing there. No information left of any kind. All left in my head, looking for the danger signs. There was a line, there was a formula, sharp as a knife, fast as a hole in the house. There was reality. Do it right. Facts are useless in emergencies. The feeling returns whenever we close our eyes. It's in my head, it's in my head, looking around inside. Facts not straight, facts not lazy, and facts not late. Facts all come with points of view. Facts don't do what I want them to. Facts just twist and turn around. Facts not living from inside out. Facts not getting the best of them. Facts not doing the best of them. I'm still waiting. 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 She go say I'll be ready. 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 Tangy dingy dingy tangy tangy, so yelly yelly. Tangy dingy dingy tangy tangy, so yelly yelly, so yelly yelly, so yelly yelly. Tangy dingy dingy tangy tangy, so yelly yelly. She is moving by remote control, so yelly yelly. Hands, some more are invisible, so yelly yelly. Sometimes the world has a load of questions. Seems like the world knows nothing at all. The world is near, but it's out of reach. Some people touch it, but it can't hold on. She is moving to destroy the world. She has messages for everyone. She is moving by remote control. At people, sometimes it seems that the world is wrong. She loves the world and all the people in it. She shakes them up when she's about to walk. She's only partly human being. She defines the possibilities. Holding on for an eternity. And you may find yourself living in a shotgun shack. And you may find yourself in another part of the world. And you may find yourself